Hello, everyone. Today we're going to review Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. You might have heard this referred to as survival as the fittest, meaning that those with favorable traits survive the longest and they are able to reproduce and pass on their favorable traits to their offspring. The one thing I want to say is that we probably should be calling it survival of the good enough or the close enough. Because one common misconception that people have about evolution is that adaptations are perfect. And in many cases, they are not perfect. And so your discussion post today is going to explore one example of an adaptation that is good enough for some situations, but might not be the best for others. In 1859, Darwin publishes a book called The Origin of Species. And in his book, he has three main points. Species produce more offspring than can survive, meaning that there's a potential for overpopulation. And individuals have to compete for resources like food and water in order to stay alive and also to hide from predators. And they also need to compete for mates. And there just simply isn't enough resources or enough mates to supply everybody because of the overpopulation. The more offspring are born that can actually survive. And those with the best traits will produce the most offspring that will also have those traits. This is what evolutionary fitness means. We say survival of the fittest, and fittest doesn't necessarily mean you're the strongest or the fastest, but evolutionary fitness is how many times you are able to pass on your favorable traits to your offspring. So the more offspring you have, the greater your fitness, and the more offspring that carry your favorable trait for an environment is higher fitness. And so, for example, we have this mother and father bunny. They have some offspring, and they all carry some traits in them, and the mothers and fathers will pass on these traits to their offspring. There are 4 steps to evolution by natural selection. And to remember these 4 steps, remember VIDA, VIDA. VIDA stands for variation, inheritance, differential survival, and adaptation. So we start off with a population of animals, and no two animals are 100% alike. Each one is diverse in the traits that they possess. So, for example, here we see these camels. Some camels have 2 humps, some have 1. Some are more of this light brown color, others are more of this golden brown color. The individuals in the population will mate and will produce offspring that inherit some of the traits of the parents. And more offspring are born than are allowed to survive given the limited resources in the environment. And so some are going to be able to survive and continue to pass on their traits, continue to reproduce, and others are not going to be able to survive because their traits are less advantageous. The ones with the more favorable traits for a particular environment are more likely to survive and reproduce and pass on their traits to offspring. And then over time, those favorable traits accumulate in the population, and that's what leads to adaptation. more and more individuals with the favorable traits survive, reproduce, pass on their genes to the next generation. And so the cycle continues over and over and over again. So natural selection allows for the accumulation of favorable traits. And favorable traits, favorable variations, are called adaptations. Think about some adaptations that tigers might have. Think about some adaptations that you might have, or snakes, or other animals. An adaptation is a trait that is going to better help that organism survive long enough to reproduce and have a lot of offspring that also carry those traits. So here we have an image that says natural selection in a nutshell. We have some brown and green beetles, and the birds are predators to the beetles, and they really like the green beetles. The green beetles are the favorite. What I would like you to do is, in a few sentences, explain what is happening in this image and what will happen to the traits in the beetles over time. The last thing that I want to mention about natural selection is that natural selection is entirely dependent on the environment in which the organism lives. There are different selective pressures in the environment that will cause certain traits to be favorable. So in this example here, the brown beetles have the favorable trait because the crows like to eat the green beetles. They think they are tastier. But if this was in a different environment, the brown beetles might be the favorite. And then in that situation, the birds would eat more of the brown beetles, leaving to the population to be mostly green. And so natural selection is entirely dependent on the environment. And because there are so many different environments around the world, it causes so many different adaptations among closely related species. And we'll talk more about how species evolve and how speciation occurs, how a population of one type of species can become two by natural selection in later videos.